Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Pagey, here once again with another video on DC TV and things that aren't happening, unfortunately. So as we know, we have the Lanterns, officially called Lanterns, HBO show in development under the banner of the new DC Studios, headed up creatively, at the very least, by James Gunn. He isn't a showrunner or like a writer on the show, but obviously he's involved in the development and most likely the larger decisions such as, I guess, where the story ends for the most part, such as the casting, might I say, of the two leads of Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. I assume those are probably the two big things he's involved with, where the story goes and who's playing the main characters. Of course, that was originally an HBO Max or Max original show, but it's moving to HBO officially. I think that happened about a month or so ago, along with a couple of other shows. Might have been a bit earlier than that, I'm not too sure. But of course, before Lanterns, there was another Green Lantern HBO Max show in development for about four years or so roughly, that was cancelled shortly after James Gunn took over with DC Studios alongside Peter Safran. And from what we know, Peter Safran was the person out of the two of James Gunn himself that was sort of involved in regards to handling this show and potentially involving it with what they had going forward, and then I guess eventually deciding, okay, this isn't going to really work with our plans. But over the past week or so, roughly, we got some brand new information about the show and I guess what the feel of the show would have been thanks to some creative appointments that were planned. That, of course, unfortunately never got to play out and be seen on screen because, well, obviously the show was cancelled. This show wouldn't have featured Jon Stewart or Hal Jordan, at least in main roles, though it was rumoured to possibly be reworked into a Jon Stewart show towards the end of its life. I don't know if anyone remembers that. They said there was plans to change and it was going to be a Jon Stewart show, but the proper series that was in development for like all those years that we talked about before would have featured multiple Lanterns in like an anthology style setup with Alan Scott, Guy Gardner, Simon Baz, and Jessica Cruz from the comics to feature as the Lanterns or the Green Lanterns on the show, as well as like an apparent original character that would have been set around the time of, I think it was Guy Gardner's time as Green Lantern. And when I say anthology, it means we would have had Alan Scott in like the mid 1900s or 1960s or something, I think it was. It might have been earlier. It might have been even around like World War II or something. Guy Gardner and I guess this apparent original character would have been in like the 80s or 90s, and then Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz would have been in the modern time. So that's a pretty cool setup for a show. How it would have worked in regards to the actual play-by-plays in certain episodes would have been interesting with all those different characters in different time periods. But it sounded cool. It sounded pretty interesting, especially because we were dealing with characters that if it wasn't for the show, we probably really wouldn't see them in live action outside of maybe Alan Scott and Guy Gardner. And obviously Guy Gardner we know is going to be appearing in James Gunn's Superman movie, which comes out in just under a year from now. So maybe that was a reason as to why the show didn't happen, because Gunn wanted to use Guy Gardner. I don't know. But this new information that we're going over today is coming from the podcast known as The Showrunner Whisperer, where they talked to Mark Guggenheim, who was a part of the show. And The Showrunner Whisperer we did source a couple of weeks ago when talking about something to do with Arrow, because of course Mark Guggenheim was involved with the show as well there. And this is from the same interview, but it was released later. This Green Lantern stuff was released after the Arrow stuff. But that Arrow stuff was about like the vast importance of the show. It's not only the future of DC on the CW when it premiered, but the CW itself. So I'll try and remember to link that first video we did in the description down below. Hopefully I remember. If I don't, if I'm an idiot and I forget, you can find it on my channel from like a week or so ago. Hopefully, but I'll try and remember. But of course, throughout the video, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below your various thoughts on this stuff. Would you have liked to have seen this show play out? Or do you think Lantern sounds like a better way to go? Let me know in the comment section down below your various thoughts on everything we go over. And of course, if you're going to enjoy the video, want to show support, drop a like, it takes 2 seconds. So we're just simply going to go over the questions. There's only 3 real things here, but they really highlight different aspects of the show, I guess, or what they were planning for different aspects of the show. So yeah, we'll just not beat around the bush, let's jump into it. Is there anything you can share about your time on the show? It was going to be awesome. It was going to be great. We had James Mangold's go-to production designer. We had the woman who designs the costumes for The Boys and a million other superhero shows, Laura Jean Shannon. Now, in regards to the production designer there, I don't think he name drops him in the interview, because it's obviously the interview and then there's, I guess, the dictated part of it. But the production designer I think he might be talking about is Francois Adoy or Adoy or something. I think it's how you pronounce his last name. I think he might be talking about him because he's He was the production designer on the 2 Wolverine movies that James Mangold did. Of course, The Wolverine back in 2013 or 2014 or whatever it was. And then Logan from 2017, 18, whatever it was. Both of which, of course, James Mangold directed. And he was also a production designer on a couple of projects that James Mangold was a producer on up until like 2019, 2020 or something like that. So that's probably who Guggenheim is referring to here, though he doesn't name drop him. And in regards to Laura Jean Shannon, she not only did the costumes for The Boys, she did the costumes for Stargirl, Titans, Doom Patrol. I think she did the Superman suit for Superman and Lois. I'm 99% sure she was the suit for Superman and Lois. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was actually from memory. But a bunch of those DC TV shows alongside The Boys. And as I said, also I'm pretty sure Superman and Lois, or the Superman suit from Superman and Lois. I think that might be the only one she did. I'm not sure if she did the Steel suit and some of the other suits we see on that show. But I'm pretty sure she at least did the Superman one. So it would have been very, cool to see that whole thing with the costumes. But Guggenheim does go more in depth in regards to the, how everything was being developed, and also does bring up the costumes on the show and what they would have looked like. Oh, and you should see those costumes, by the way. Not a single bit of CG in any of them. I have the designs on my phone. Oh god, they looked amazing. The production art, it would blow you away. Honestly, stuff that looked incredible, but looked like a movie. We had an amazing writing staff. We'd written all 8 scripts of the first season, so I know what the show would have been, and it was going to be emotional and exciting with 2 different time periods. Some, I think, incredibly strong character work that was very, very, very true to the franchise of Green Lantern. Yeah, bums me out. But unfortunately, that's the reality of doing TV in the 2020s. You can write an entire season of television and not shoot a frame. It didn't always used to be that way, but it is the way that, but it is that way now, and it takes a lot of self-control some days to avoid going on Instagram or Twitter and be like, this is what you could have had. But that's the most interesting thing, the little CG stuff, which I think is obviously with Alan Scott, they would have made like a proper suit, you think. Guy Gardner, you think they would have made very comic accurate suits for them. The only one where I expect maybe a bit of CG if they were going to do it would have been like Jessica Cruz, because she has some stuff going on with her design where, at least if you adapt it straight from the comics, where you think they'd probably use some CG. And I guess the apparent original character that was being designed for the show, they think, they might have used some CG there. But I think a lot of them, Simon Baz probably could have been very practical on no CG outside of him using his powers, obviously. But I don't know, it makes me want to go, is there a hacker around? Do we have a Felicity Smoke around that might be able to hack into good old Guggenheim's phone and get some of those designs out? Because I wouldn't mind seeing them. Now, I don't think it means any of the suits were actually made outside of maybe some mock stuff, but I don't think anything serious was made, unfortunately, by the looks of it. It was just, I guess, the actual just designs and stuff. But, that's enough where you can get a decent feel of, what they would have looked like or turned out in live action. Now, he does mention that they'd written all 8 scripts. We sort of knew that, I think. I think one of the people on the show talked about it. So if you don't know the layout of the show and who was involved, of course, Berlanti was the head executive producer. It's under his production company of Berlanti Productions, but the showrunner was Seth Grahame-Smith, he wrote the It movies. He was the original director, like proper director that actually was doing stuff and working at Warner Brothers for the Flash movie back in the day. So he was the showrunner for the show. And then we had Jeff Johns was attached to the show, helping with the writing. Obviously Guggenheim, because he's talking right now. I think there might have been someone else. And then there was also Lamont McGee, who was a part of Black Lightning. And Lamont McGee now works for Jeff Johns and his comic label, Ghost Machine. So though the show didn't happen, I guess it made some connections that then perspired or carried on into the future, as at least with Jeff Johns and Lamont McGee. But yeah, but he's talking about it. It's very interesting about how you can have 8 scripts, 8 episodes of this show for the first season at the very least, all written. It would have taken them a while to get it all done, and it just doesn't happen. You just throw them in the bin. No one's ever going to know, at least I guess in the near future. Maybe they might leak, I'm not too sure. But, no one's ever going to see it, which is very disappointing. And obviously there probably would have been some other writers, but those were the ones that I think were out there at the very least. Now, the interesting thing there that sort of contradicts something I said, which maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not the one that made it up. I'm going off stuff that was released publicly, is that Guggenheim says there was 2 different time periods. So, of course, there would have to be in the period with Alan Scott, and I think they were going to deal with, like, him as a person, his own personal struggles. So that would have had to been in the past, at least a decent, like, way. He couldn't have been in the 80s, I don't think. I think they would have had to set him earlier. But we were told, I think, that Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz were in the present day. So I don't know where Guy Gardner and that apparent original character then lie. Maybe they were showing up in the present day and then there was some flashbacks or something. But there's two distinct time periods which are the main focus, which is maybe the Alan Scott period and then the present day. I'm not too sure. Now, in regards to what he's talking about there, like how you can have an entire season of television and then not shoot a frame, and, you know, back in the day you could, it's because now everything's pretty much developed for streaming. Like the majority of programming is made for streaming, where you don't do pilot season. Pilot season is for network TV. You don't do pilot season nowadays with the streaming shows. You do pitch season, where you pitch, here's my 6-episode season. That's then going to take 4 years to do each season if we don't get cancelled by Netflix or something, even though people watch the show and like it. So that's what he's talking about there. And finally, Guggenheim did talk about Simon Baz, because it was one of the confirmed characters. And, you know, Guggenheim talks about what he was looking forward to when it came to the character. And he says, our plans for Simon were really cool. The costume that Laura had designed for him was amazing. We had some really, really cool plans. It's a bummer. That's all I will say. Once again, there's probably some NDA stuff here and just things that Guggenheim can't talk about. And also there's just probably some relationships he'd like to keep intact and not sort of ruin by leaking stuff that he's not meant to leak. But yeah, Simon Baz is an interesting character just because of also some of the moral stuff, but also if they went from the comic stuff as well, just things that happened in his past. If you don't know, you can look up Simon Baz and see how it would have been interesting, especially in like a modern day context, I guess, like politically, if you want to put it. Would have been interesting at the very least, especially a dynamic with Jessica Cruz as well. But as I was saying before, like, is there like possibly anything from this show that could hit the public eye? And I mean, I could see some things that are maybe under like files, like those costume mock-ups potentially, like the production design things and plans there, maybe stuff like that, and maybe like an episode 1 script. Like those are the things where maybe you can get them out. But especially nowadays, like, I think it's pretty hard for stuff like that to get out just because of the way that things are done. So I'd be very, very shocked if that happened, unless someone just was like YOLO and just decided to just put it out, whether it was Guggenheim or someone else, or it's just talked about in interviews. Like you could get like Jeff Johns in an interview, Seth Grahame-Smith in an interview, another interview with Guggenheim in 3 or 4 years where they go, you know what, whatever, and just give you a bit of a tease as to where they were going. You got to remember, it's only been like about a year and a half or whatever it is since they really scrapped this. So it's still pretty fresh. It's not like it's 5 years ago or something. It's pretty recent in the bigger picture. So, you know, it would be pretty soon if something came out now. Now, whether like Lanterns is a better show or not, that's another question. They're different shows. You can even just tell, even though Guggenheim doesn't really talk about it here, they're different shows. Like we were going to be having this anthology show dealing with different Lanterns and different time periods, and I guess how they're viewed in different time periods potentially. Lanterns is going to be a very focused show in regards to pushing story forward for the larger universe, and it might just be a mini series, 1 season, that's it. While this show of Green Lantern with all these different Lanterns was going to be multi-season, hopefully, or potentially. So different shows, it's really hard to compare them, though we don't really know each show's story specifically and where it's going to go. But at least with Lanterns, we'll get to eventually see that on screen sooner rather than later. Well, sooner rather than never, because never's the case with this cancelled show. So at least we'll get to see it with Lanterns eventually. Hopefully by the end of next year, fingers crossed, because, God, they just take too long to make shows nowadays, don't they? But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, it'd be awesome if you could drop a like on it, show support. Let me know in the comment section down below your various thoughts and everything we went over in this video. Always curious to read what you guys are thinking. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.